so to speak. I have 3 cars here. All of my cars have been bought just strictly out of passion, whether it's a Bitzerini or a Porsche or a Cobra. I kind of lock on and then I just fall in love and I have it. So I've had this yellow car 50 years. And so in 1967, I just bought a little Porsche from what used to be the Porsche Ferrari dealership here in town, Auto Zipper and Bob Estes, Estes Zipper. And I brought my Porsche in to be serviced in 1967. And Bill Doheny, who's a well-known Angelino who owned Doheny Drive, he owned Superior Oil, 76. And he owned Greystone. He pulled up with this car. There's a little yellow cab driver's hat in the back. And he was having it serviced. And I looked at that car, and for me, I guess it was like my son seeing a Countach for the first time. I was just breathless. And I just fell in love with that car. And 2 years later, it was offered to me, and I bought it from him. I paid $10,750, which was my net worth in 1970. And that was my driver, daily driver. And so I drove it for probably a year, and then a lady backed into the nose, and I had to have the nose kind of fogged in. But other than that, I've done nothing but drive the car and change the oil for 50 years. It's the original interior is under the seat covers. And one other thing that probably should be noted, just to let you know how smart I was, I bought the car in 1970, and I had it about 6 months. And I remember there was a big leasing company in LA called Southwest Leasing, and there's a fellow named Jerry Siemens who used to trade in a lot of cars. And so this fellow with the GTO wanted to trade me straight across. Thought he could get me. He had it advertised for $8,500 in the same ad as one of these for $10,500, and I thought, not that stupid. And by the way, I was in my chrome wheel period and roll-up windows, and I just said, no, I'm not interested. So I left about $60 million on the table. So anyways, I've never looked at the cars as an investment. It's just absolute passion. So I've had that car a very long time. When I was in college, our fraternity advisor, alumni advisor, had a short wheelbase Berlinette, and I'd always loved those cars. And so that was my 60th birthday present to myself. It was Octane magazine had first come out, and Adrian Hamilton in the UK had this car. It belonged to a fellow who was one of the founders of Microsoft, Greg Witten, and he had it for sale. And that's what they call a CFAC, which is a factory hot rod. And this car was 3rd overall at Le Mans and 1st in class. And it was really like one of the first kind of race cars that I bought for myself. I had some hot rods and a few other little race cars, but all of a sudden, the Le Mans thing just lit up. Le Mans, and or Le Mans or whatever. There is not a more important race on planet Earth for automobile people than Le Mans. That is the Olympic Games, Super Bowl, World Cup. It's absolutely everything. So I paid twice what a street car was for that car, and I brought it home, and I've never regretted it. We've done the Colorado Grand in it. We've done several rallies. We drive it around town, and several people have seen me driving it. So again, it's about the drive. It wasn't that I was absolutely looking for a Ferrari, but that car just resonated with me. By the way, you mentioned Ed Niles. Ed Niles owned this car, and he owned that car. Ed Niles probably owned more great Ferraris than any human being, ever. And he's fantastic. So I bought my first real car in 1960 from a fellow named John von Neumann. And he was the Porsche distributor and Ferrari distributor in LA, Volkswagen, Porsche, and Ferrari. And I bought a Porsche from him in 1960. And I read a little bit about him, and I heard about this car. This was what they call John von Neumann's hot rod. And it's a 1957 Ferrari TRC, Testarossa, Appendix C. Appendix C means it has a full windscreen and doors on both sides, because before that, you only really needed one door, and you could use just a little mono windscreen and a tonneau. This does have the tonneau. So John von Neumann owned this car. It was driven by John von Neumann, Richie Ginther, and Ken Miles. And I have great pictures of all those guys. Ken Miles was featured in the movie Ford versus Ferrari. He was basically the Ferrari, or the Shelby's test driver and engineer. So he drove this car, as did Richie Ginther, who was a Formula One driver, and Johnny von Neumann. But so I locked onto this car about 10 years before I bought it. And there was some car brokers in LA that kind of the go-to guys that just, could put anything together. And I said, do you know where John von Neumann's hot rod is? Oh yeah, I'll find it. I said, I'd really like to buy that car. So anyways, to make a long story short, it turned out that this car was owned by a drug dealer in Europe, and it was seized by Interpol. And so both of the brokers came back to me and said, the car is not going to be available. It's seized by Interpol, and they've got it, impounded. So I kind of laid low for a while, and then I was on my way to Goodwood racing that Corvette, that number 2 car. And a friend of mine called and said, this car is coming up for sale in a sealed bid auction in The Hague. Interpol has a sealed bid auction. And I didn't have any idea what it was worth. I had an idea what I'd like to pay for it, but I was leaving the next day, and you had to have a certified bank check or a letter of credit. And there was no way I could put that together before I left. So I called a friend of mine, Chip Connor, and he underwrote our pavilion, the Connor Pavilion. I said, Chip, I need a substantial letter of credit. and I hired this attorney, Martin Emerson. You probably know Martin. He's kind of the go-to attorney. And I said, Martin, I want to put in a bid for this car. So this was Thursday. I arrived at Goodwood. I put a bid in on Thursday. And thinking, if I hadn't heard about it, nobody knows about this. So I'm going to sneak in and get this. When you go to Goodwood, that's where everybody comes together, and everybody's talking about this auction. This was not the only car. They had about 10 or 15 Ferraris. This is the only car I wanted. So I was like sleepless, and I thought, I better up my ante, because I put in an offer that I thought would be really cool if I got it for that price. But I'd been 10 years wanting it, and I thought, I'm going to raise it. So I called Martin. I said, raise the bid on Friday. And then I'm around Friday at a big dinner at Goodwood, and everybody's talking about this auction. Ugh. So I called Martin Friday night. I said, bet the whole letter of credit. just go for it. If it was meant to be, it was meant to be. So I get back, and on the windshield wiper on the Corvette is Martin's card that says, you won the auction. I go, ah. And that was like, ah. I didn't know I didn't know if I was twice what the underbidder was. And then at the time, there was a company called Symbolic in San Diego, and they were big Ferrari dealers. And so Bill Noon came up to me, who's the kind of their go-to guy, and he said, do you want to sell the Testarossa? I said, absolutely not. He said, well, I was the underbidder. I said, how do you know? He said, I was there when they opened the envelopes. I said, how far under were you, I don't want to sound so cavalier, but he was 50,000 under, which, is a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but it could have been worse. So we brought the car back here, and a friend of mine had told me where the original engine was for the car. It was owned by Pete Lovely up in Seattle. And of course, my first call was to Pete, because I wanted to put the engine back with the car. He said, I'm not interested in selling that engine. Of course he's not interested. I'm the only place that engine could go. So he had to let me kind of think about it. So about a month later, he calls and says, Bruce, I've kind of changed some stuff around. If you want the engine, here's the price, and I'll take the engine that's in the car. I had no choice. I bought it. So we were able to reunite the car and the engine, the TR engine, and a fellow named Steve Beckman in Orange County did a rotisserie restoration, original body. And when we first got the car, there was electrolysis around the doors, and so Steve Beckman was saying, well, we can reskin that door just perfectly. Oh, I said, no. We're preserving every square inch of metal. So he said, well, it'll take me a week to get all that. I said, take your time. So he did all the body work. Phil Riley and Company up in North rebuilt the engine, did all the mechanical work. And it's just been a joy. Again, we showed it at Pebble Beach and then drove it home. We've put a lot of miles on it. It drives great, and it's you know, people say, well, they're so temperamental, Ferraris. Well, you don't win races unless you finish, and you're up against world-class competition. So these cars are absolutely bulletproof, and you get them dialed in, and they just stay and they run
We
great.
used to drive this to Supercar Sunday in Woodland Hills.
Yeah, I've enjoyed this car so much. So that's kind of the short story of this car.
How long did the restoration take, Bruce?